look, then I go, dang, I look one more time. Friends, the more anointed you are, the more afflictions you will have. Somebody say, I know that's right. But in this Psalm 34, David is writing in his diary, and he is now remembering some of the battles and some of the storms and a few of the pains he encountered in his life. And in verse 19, he begins by telling the truth. He says, many are the afflictions of the righteous. His life has been filled with a conundrum of pain. And I may not be preaching to you this morning, but there's somebody sitting beside you who is saying, this preacher is preaching to me, because you are in a season in your life where just seems like the harder you try, the harder it gets. Today I want to talk to somebody who is saying, preacher, I'm at the point where I just can't take anymore. For somebody, you are right now at a place or at a point where depression is real, where walking away is a strong option. Somebody is at the place where suicide is real, where a homicide is real, where calling home and telling your kids, tell your mama, tell your daddy, I'm not coming home anymore, is a real thought. Somebody is at the place where you feel like walking on that job and telling them Negroes where to go and how fast to get there. And one of the worst mistakes we can make in church is to believe that just because people come to church that everything is right in their life. Am I talking to anybody in church? But for many of us in this room today, we have a testimony that says if it ain't one thing, it's something else. If it's not the electric company, it's the cable company. If it's not your health, it's your finances. If it's not your friend, it's your nosy neighbor. If it's not the car, it's the house. If it's not the tires, it's the roof. If it's not a leak, it's a crack. If it's not your co-worker, it's a neighbor. If it's not the parents, it's your siblings. If it's not your spouse, it's your children. If it's not your ex, it's the in-laws. If it's not the sex, it's the money. If it's not the dog, it's the cat. If it's not an email, it's a text message. If it's not your head, it's your heart. If it's not your back, it's your legs. If it's not your blood, it's your sugar. If it's not the job, it's at church. It's always something. I mean, if it's not always something, it's always somebody. Somebody asking you for help. Somebody asking you for more. Somebody saying, is that all you got? Somebody saying, somebody hating on you and they don't even know you like that. Look at somebody and say, there's always something. And I know you don't like folk knowing your business. But when you look back over your life, there are about 203 people in this room who know something about dealing with some affliction. Am I talking to anybody in here? When you were sick, you dealt with some affliction. When your marriage was rocky and on the verge of destruction, you dealt with some affliction. When your child was acting like he was on crack, you dealt with some affliction. When your bills were all due at the same time, you dealt with some affliction. When you had to bury somebody you loved, there was some affliction. And if no one else can agree with David, you can, because you too have the same complaint with God. Many are the afflictions of the righteous. But David is a real preacher, Dr. Browning. He's a real preacher of the gospel, because a real preacher won't just leave you hanging with the bad news without providing you some good news. A real pastor won't just beat you down without also building you up. A real pastor will give you the facts, but he will remind you to hold on to your faith. David begins verse 19 by saying, many are the afflictions of the righteous. But when he looks back over his life, he begins to think things over. David began this verse with a complaint, because he said, many are the afflictions of the righteous. But if you keep on reading, when he wrote in his diary, there are two words that follow a conjunction word that changed the trajectory of this whole diary entry. And if you know anything about a conjunction word, a word like but, somebody say but. If you know anything about a conjunction word, a word like but, you know that the word but changes the entire direction of a sentence. David said, many are the afflictions of the righteous, but then he says, but the Lord delivers him out of them all. In other words, no matter how bad things were before the but, as soon as he said the word but, everything changes. David now has a testimony that says, I've had some good days and I've had some hills to climb. I've had some weary days and some sleepless nights. But when I look around, thank you, and think things over, all of my good days have outweighed my bad days. And now he has a testimony that says I won't complain. And I don't know why some of y'all are looking at me like you don't understand the words that are coming out of my mouth. Because when all of us look back over our lives, all of us have a but the Lord testimony. Do I have a witness up in here? Somebody said you wouldn't make it, but the Lord. Somebody said you couldn't take it, but the Lord. Somebody said you wouldn't be here, but the Lord. Some of us should be crazy, but the Lord. Some of us should have been put out, but the Lord. Some of us should still be on drugs, but the Lord. Somebody should still be locked up, but the Lord. I heard somebody say that millions didn't make it, but I dare you just grab somebody and say, but I'm one of the ones who did. Am I talking to anybody in here who, when you look back over your life, you got a but the Lord testimony? It could have been my child, but the Lord. It could have been my spouse, but the Lord. It could have been your church, but the Lord. It could have been your ministry, but the Lord. There is somebody who can say, I almost gave up, but the Lord. But the Lord made a way, but the Lord gave me some strength, but the Lord helped me out, but the Lord protected me, but the Lord shielded me, but the Lord fixed it, but the Lord worked it out. I don't care what happened before the but. What matters is what happened after the but. And I hate to tell the truth in here, but there may be some folk in this church who can't even praise God because they are so hooked on your but. Can I talk to somebody? They still talking about your but. They still texting about your but. They still pointing fingers at your but. But just do me a favor and look at that person behind you and say, stop looking at my butt. Come on, help me preach. Come on, say, stop laughing at my butt. Say, stop talking about my butt. Because it doesn't matter what happened before the butt. All that matters is what happens after the butt. Is there anybody in church who can say, I've got a testimony? I was lost before the butt, but now I'm found. I was blind before the butt, but now I see. I was sick before the butt, but now I'm healed. I was a junkie before the butt, but now I'm free. I was a sinner before the but now I'm saved by his power divine. I see y'all don't know what I'm talking about, but can I call on some Bible witnesses who have a but testimony? Come here, Esther. Esther would say, I was trying to get to the king, but one day I made up in my mind. I said, if I perish, just let me perish. But I'm going to see the king. Come here, David. David one day said that weeping may endure for a night, but joy comes in the morning. I see y'all not feeling me, so let me preach a little while longer. Come here, Joseph. When he looked back over his life, he looked at his brothers and said, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for my good. The psalmist one day said, I've been young, but now I'm old, but I've never seen the righteous forsaken. Job said, though I be tried in the fire, but when he gets through with me, I shall come forth as pure gold. Joshua said, choose ye this day whom you will serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Maybe none of that makes you happy. Maybe none of that makes you smile. But come here, Jesus. Jesus told us, he said, you can put me on a cross, but notice 3 days later, I shall rise. I dare you just grab somebody. Come on, grab them by the hand and say, neighbor, I wish I had the time to share my testimony, but all I can say is he's been good. I should have died, but God, I should be crazy, but God, I should have lost my mind, but God. The hymn writer said, amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, seen the lightning flashing. I've heard the thunder roar. I've felt sin breakers dashing, trying to conquer my soul. But I heard Jesus say, you better fight on. He promised never to leave me, never to leave me alone. Come on, let's go home. Grab somebody by the hand and say, neighbor, I said I wouldn't, gonna tell nobody, but I just can't keep it to myself. I said I was gonna come to church and be still, but when I look back over my life and see where he's brought me from, I gotta give him praise. I gotta give him glory, because he's been good. And when I think of his goodness, yes, and all that he's done for me,